Yes, it wouldn't be a 49ers offseason, at least currently, without a Brandon Aiyuk trade rumor. And if you haven't heard already, according to unnamed sources on X, Brandon Aiyuk has already been traded to the Patriots. He's already been traded to the Browns. I think at one point he was potentially traded to the Steelers again. For whatever reason, ever since John Lynch spoke at the NFL Combine, basically not shutting down trade talks around Brandon Ayuk, they have kind of just caught fire. So a lot of interesting kind of random accounts, just kind of similar to what we saw last offseason, have proclaimed that Brandon Ayuk has been traded. Now that hasn't been the case, and that's not the case, but we're going to talk about the actual deadline for a Brandon Aiyuk trade and what date we have to pay attention to, why we have to pay attention to that date. We're going to talk about potential teams that could actually enter the mix and maybe what that compensation could look like if the San Francisco 49ers ultimately pull the trigger on a Brandon Aiyuk trade. There's been a reason why I haven't made a video about this yet. There has been so many ongoing conversations, like I've mentioned, so many potential trade proposals put out by, this media outlet, that media outlet. And I've just kind of turned away from it because, and all the feedback that I've gotten from you guys from last year when I was all over the Brandon Ayuk trade rumors, most of you didn't like it. You didn't want to hear it. So I haven't given you any of that this off season, but I figured it's time to kind of dip our toes in because there is a date that is very close that could trigger a potential trade. So let's talk about it. On the 1st, April 1st, this is our trade deadline target right now. If the 49ers are going to move on from Brandon Ayuk, it will be before this date. And the reason why is because on April 1st, a $31 million guarantee will be triggered in his contract, and that will have him obviously under contract for the 2025 season. And this is where the 49ers can get out of his contract and also get out of paying him that 31 million guaranteed. If they trade him before this date, the other team will take on his contract and this responsibility. So effectively, the 49ers would be able to get out of a 4-year, $110 million contract with BA if they trade him before the first. So let's talk about the viability of this potentially happening, why it might be a real possibility, and some of the value and potential teams that could be associated with this. So with BA, obviously he's coming off an injury and a significant injury at that. And we don't know where he is in his rehab. Now, maybe behind closed doors they do. And it's an interesting scenario because I don't know how BA would pass a physical at this point. So they might have to waive the physical if he were to be traded. But that obviously hurts his value. But I don't think the value for the 49ers is coming in the form of trade compensation. I think the value for the 49ers in making this move is getting out of his contract. And that's where I really think it comes from. And it kind of is a similar situation to the Jordan Mason move. I don't think the 49ers needed to trade Jordan Mason. I just don't think they wanted to pay Jordan Mason. And so they moved him for a relatively I don't think the value was like that good. A lot of people think the value was good because Jordan Mason was an undrafted free agent. I don't think so. We can have that argument until we're blue in the face. I still don't think it was a good value because to me, it was clear that they were just moving off his contract. It is what it is. They don't want to pay him. That's fine. You have Isaac Guerrero, you have other guys. That's fine. But that's a similar situation here because he's coming off a significant knee injury. We don't know the status of where he's at. On top of the fact that the team that's trading for him is taking on a 4-year, $110 million contract, paying him $31 million guaranteed, I really don't think the value would be all that much in the form of trade compensation. I see people throwing out like seconds and thirds, sometimes potentially firsts. Honestly, in this situation, I would be surprised if the 49ers got back anything better than a 6th round draft pick. And let's kind of contextualize that a little bit. Debo Samuel just got traded for a 5th round pick. Now, I think with where both wide receivers are at in their career, we're going to say Brandon Ayuk's the better wide receiver. The problem is Brandon Ayuk's coming off a serious knee injury, and he has a big time contract to be paid out. One of the reasons why Debo only went for a 5th, some didn't believe that was good value. The As we saw, Commanders took on his $17 million contract. Actually, they reworked it and they made it fully guaranteed and gave him the opportunity to earn up to 23, I think it was. So they took on the contract and they extended him, which is why the 49ers got a 5th round draft pick in return. It's why it's considered a good value because the Commanders took on his contract. The same thing applies to BA. Another team is taking on his contract and his knee injury. So I would be shocked to see him go for any more than a 6th or a 5th. Um, and again, the value for the 49ers in this trade is not the trade compensation. The value is moving off the contract, finding a team who would be willing to take on that deal. And so, who are some of those teams? I think the teams that were very, very interested in trading for Brandon Ayuk before he signed ultimately back with the 49ers last year, we had heard that the Patriots were about to spend insane amount of money on Brandon Ayuk. They were willing to pay him, I think, in around 32 million per year. I think they were willing to pay him an insane number on the guaranteed money. And BA ultimately said he didn't want to play for them, so it didn't work out. Same thing went for the Browns. He said he didn't want to play for the Browns either. It was between the Steelers and the 49ers. Well, we saw the Steelers. They traded for DK Metcalf. They're probably good on a trade right now. But we do know the Patriots have been poking around. They brought in Stephon Diggs. So we know they want a wide receiver to pair up with Drake May. And then with the Cleveland Browns, I don't know, for whatever reason, they're always on the look for wide receivers. They just stockpile and hoard wide receivers and do nothing with them. Um, but they could be they're one of those desperate types of teams who might be willing to take on that contract and take on a player like Brandon Ayuk. We saw them trade for Jerry Jeudy, pay Jerry Jeudy a good amount, probably more than he needed to be paid at that time. So maybe they would see like, oh well, we can bring in Brandon Ayuk, only really trade maybe a 6th, 5th-round draft pick. We'll just take on the contract, but we get BA. So those two teams seem like the teams that make the most sense for a potential trade, who have the money and need a wide receiver. So that's the way that I'm looking at it. And, if you want to put a percentage chance on BA getting traded, I think you have to look at the 49ers' recent moves and what they're doing this offseason. And I would say that the moves that they're making this offseason are more to balance the books than to put out a, top tier roster, because they're and we understand why. They have to make sure they can forecast into the future, project, if they do pay Brock Purdy and George Kittle and Fred Warner, they've got to do certain things to make sure that they can man that and handle that, which is why they would even discuss trading Brandon Ayuk in the first place. So, all of these things combined, we've talked about the deadline date, April 1st. We've talked about why it's April 1st, because it triggers a $31 million guarantee in his contract. The 49ers can trade him before that date, effectively get out of a 4-year, $110 million contract. They will take on a substantial dead cap hit for this season, But as we mentioned, they've already done that and they don't seem to have an issue with that. And um based on that situation, you just have to be okay with the compensation. And the compensation, like I said, I would be surprised. I could be completely wrong at this. I would be surprised if it was better than a fifth or sixth round, considering the injury, considering the contract. So, all that considered, you look at the Browns, you look at the Patriots, teams that the 49ers are not concerned about. I don't think they would have any issues with trading him to those teams. Now the question becomes, do they actually do it? Do they make that move? Do they move off of Brandon Aiyuk after just paying him last year and going through that whole situation? Do they make that move? Because it was Kyle Shanahan who stopped the trade. Now it feels like, and again, I'm speculating, doesn't really feel like Kyle has that opportunity to say, no, don't trade this guy. If the 49ers feel it makes sense to get out of this contract based on how they've operated this offseason, it seems like that's something that they would absolutely entertain and do. I could see the 49ers doing it. Now the question is, do you see them doing it? Do you see them making the trade? Would you be happy with the return that I'm projecting they would get? Maybe you think they will get higher amount in trade. I'm just, I guess, skeptical that they would get a bunch in return. But you let me know what you think in the comments below. And I'm curious to see, would you trade him? Would you take a lower amount and compensation to trade him, or would you keep him? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more updates.